Hi, everyone. Welcome to Slate's recap of the second and final presidential debate, the last presidential debate we'll see for a couple of years, which is terrific news. I'm Jim Newell. I'm a senior politics writer for Slate.
I'm Lili Loofbourow. I'm a staff writer at Slate.
And I'm Will Saletan, another writer for Slate.
So before we pop champagne bottles for the end of debate season, I guess we should talk a little bit about what happened. Lili, do you want to give your takeaway of what you saw first?
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think it was notably different from the last debate. The mute button seems to have helped moderate some of Trump's more abrasive tendencies, at least in the beginning. He was much more. I think people have been saying disciplined. I would say muted. Literally, he was kind of a restrained version of himself, which made for at least in theory, more interesting exchange of ideas. In practice, I think it still ended up being a fair amount of substance-free bloviating. But I would say that both Biden and Trump were, in my view, did better than they did in the first debate. And that as things progressed, that started to degrade. So I think towards the end, Trump was doing a lot more of kind of like mean-spirited interrogatory, like direct accusations at Biden rather than responding to the moderator. And Biden, I think, was kind of starting to stutter more and lose some composure. But on the whole, I think that Trump needed to make this a radical pivot, and I don't think he achieved that. And I think that Biden was actually better than he's been for some time, even if he didn't always nail Trump on things that I think it would be quite easy to nail him on. That was my impression.
Will, what about you?
Well, I thought that Trump did way, way better than I expected. And I was afraid during the debate that was going to be the response afterwards from the pundits, the public, the post-debate polling. And that didn't happen. And so I'm trying to understand why. And I think the reason is that nerds like me who've been following the election, been just seeing, Trump had a terrible performance in the first debate. He was obnoxious. He was less obnoxious. I was looking at Trump, and I think ordinary voters or people who hadn't decided yet were looking at Biden, right? They'd already made up their mind about Trump. And so what they saw was Joe Biden was better than he was in the first debate and was coherent, looked like he was on top of things, looked like he wanted to sort of unite the country, which is what a lot of these people want, these last-minute deciders. And so I think Biden's relatively good performance for those people overshadowed Trump's relatively good performance. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I thought they were both really quite good. I mean, like Lili was saying, it devolved a little bit towards the end there to old habits. I mean, my take after it ended was I think the polls will be pretty much split along existing polling lines, about Biden with a 10-point lead. And I think the CNN instant poll had Biden leading, or, who won the debate. Biden was leading that by 14 points. So, yeah, pretty much just reinforced the existing race. I thought that, it was probably Trump's best debate he's ever had. But Biden still really got a lot of really clean hits in when they were talking about coronavirus, when they were talking about Obamacare. You heard Trump say again, even though it's existing administration policy that he wants the Supreme Court to get rid of Obamacare on family separation. Biden hit him pretty hard. I guess, the one thing I was surprised by, I guess there was so much hype going in about how Trump would just try to talk so much about Hunter Biden and the laptop and China and this whole big Rudy Giuliani turning laptops into Delaware State Police for some reason scandal that's a little bit difficult to follow. And there was a little bit of talk about that in the beginning, but I thought Biden deflected it pretty well by turning it back on Trump and all of his, numerous foreign entanglements. And then it was pretty quickly dispensed with. So, and also as the debate was ending, we saw a Wall Street Journal news article that was saying that Joe Biden wasn't really involved. So the shelf life on that scandal in terms of something that could blow up into something bigger that could change the race, I think is pretty much over. So yeah, I thought it was pretty evenly matched, and it's not going to affect the race, and that's a problem for Trump because he's losing. So,
Did either of you guys think it was a little weird the way that Trump talked about the Biden family stuff? And I mean, Trump's like talks about the laptop from hell and AOC plus three and all this stuff that like you would only know about if you were an avid Fox News viewer. And it just seemed like he had lost his ability to communicate with anybody outside his base, just to even pause and say, let me explain what this laptop is, or who I'm talking about when I say AOC.
right. Yeah, I think he. Go ahead,
Go
Lily.
ahead. Well, yeah, I mean, I think the big man thing was supposed to be an epic burn if you're in that universe. I didn't know, so I was like, he is a big man, or maybe he's not the big man. I don't know what's happening. The pillows and sheets was another weird kind of like, I mean, clearly that means something to Trump, but I don't think that was legible to a lot of people based on Twitter reactions. Everyone was trying to figure out what that meant. Yeah, I mean, I think he's speaking in like the argot of like deep Fox News, I don't know, foxholes that we don't know how to actually. I don't think the average voter knows how to interpret a lot of that. And I think Trump has forgotten that he needs to interpret. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that it was weird because there was some Fox News brain stuff coming out of Trump, and yet I felt like he was intentionally trying not to do that. Like, I do feel like his advisors had gotten to him to a certain extent and said, you need to do X, Y, and Z, or you're going to lose the race tonight if you just do a repeat of the last performance. So you could tell that with him not being as hot as he was the last time, until the end when he started to get kind of head up again. He seemed on the Fox News stuff, he really didn't go as deep into the Hunter stuff as I thought he could have. His first question was, there's a scandal with you taking money from China. Joe, I think you owe an explanation, But it was strange because I felt like he was trying to restrain himself and trying to do what his advisors did to keep himself alive. And yet it still kind of came out anyway.
I keep thinking back to his rallies between the first debate and this one. And he tells his crowds that he did great in the first debate, that he won the debate, right? And then he comes out in this debate and does exactly the opposite of what he did in the first debate. Clearly, he believes from the way he behaved in this debate that it didn't work, or that he needed to try something different.
Right, and he knew.
The other interesting change, I think, is that, he said law and order just a bunch of times in the first debate, and that has been such an important part of his, current branding as president. And one of the weirder things, which I think Dave Weigel also pointed out, is that he kept sort of accusing Biden of being the law and order guy with the crime stuff. It was a kind of a strange inversion of his usual line, because we know that Trump campaigned for the Central Park 5 to get the death penalty. For years he's been pushing for more criminal sanctions, not fewer. But his attack line against Biden was kind of paradoxically that he was too tough on crime.
He's always been that way a little bit, like talking out of both sides of his mouth on the issue. He really tries to get his base fired up with the law and order talk, but then, he recognizes there's a vulnerability for Biden on his authorship of the crime bill. So he tries to, needle him on that. So it's always completely contradictory. I guess, I don't know. I was going to go into crime a little bit more, but maybe we could get into how we thought that the innovation last night of the ability of the moderator to cut off mics after candidates were speaking for 2 minutes at a time, how we thought that affected the flow of the debate and whether that was a worthwhile thing that they should have added.
Yeah,
well, I thought it was
clearly,
great.
right? Yeah, it was 100 times. It was more boring, but I think that's probably what politics should be. And I think I thought it worked amazing. She did a good job too. I think, keep trying to keep them in line, but she wasn't presented with the sort of spectacular challenge that Trump posed to Chris Wallace either, because Trump was just out of control in the first one. I think I'm always surprised to hear that Trump is heeding his advisors' advice, because it seems like he's often quite resistant to doing so. But he was working very hard, I think, at least at first, to try to obey those rules, partly, I think, because he didn't want to be seen speaking and not being heard. I think that would have been a humiliating visual.
It's true.
That's an interesting point. I mean, Kristen Welker did fine. I think she was good. But the biggest difference between her and Chris Wallace was just that Wallace was completely overwhelmed by this bombastic fool who kept interrupting and just being a jerk. And for whatever reason, Trump, that's a really interesting point, Lily. I hadn't thought about him fearing the humiliation of speaking with. I think there was only one moment when he spoke that I noticed, and his mic was cut off. But whatever it was, he behaved himself better, and that made her job so much easier. I did want to say one thing about the crime stuff. Trump has no conscience, right? And he has no sense of coherence. He doesn't believe anything. He just says whatever he thinks will work for you. So that is, I think, what produces this bizarre phenomenon of telling white America that Joe Biden is weak on law and order, and that dark-skinned people and their low-income projects are going to overrun your suburbs. And then just pausing every now and then to say to black people, Joe Biden passed this crime bill that was bad for you. Like, now you're supposed to believe that I give anything about you.
I mean, I do appreciate Trump's commitment to his bit about, with the possible exception of Abraham Lincoln, he's the best president for black people ever. I know he really loves saying that, even though it's so, maybe he's in on the joke that he knows he overinflates his importance a little bit. I don't know. He seemed to be like grinning when he said that part. But I also thought I couldn't tell just how much of the difference of last night was because of the change in mic policy, or if it was just Trump recognizing that if he did what he did last time, he was really pretty doomed, because that did hurt him a few points in the polls, that last debate.
Jim, I wanted to ask you, you've been following what's happening with older voters. Like, what is your sense of what last night did?
I mean, I think last night really just froze everything in place. And with older voters, he's already behind. I mean, I wrote about that trend and was reporting on that trend over the summer. It certainly hasn't abated since then. I mean, it depends poll to poll and state to state, but it looks like he's on pace to lose senior voters nationally, who he won by 9 points last time. They were his best age demographic. So and when I was reporting it, it's not just coronavirus, although that did, accelerate the trend a little bit of him losing seniors. But a lot of the stuff, that people mock sometimes as something that voters don't care about, the stuff about how he comports himself and his behavior, I think that really does resonate with senior voters. And I think, it was probably imperative for him to cool it down last night, especially with that demographic.
They both seemed very old to me last night. I don't know if this was your experience, but I think because in the first debate, they were both being, shouting and interrupting and aggressive. I think in this more subdued context, they both seemed older. I
feel like Biden seems pretty old every time. I mean, it's, this is another overshoot from the Trump campaign where they spent all this time talking about how he has dementia or he's senile. I don't think he has dementia or he's senile, but he's clearly down from his prime. I mean, he's definitely a little bit slower, and everyone has to make their own choice about, whether it's good enough. I personally think it's good enough, but you could just see like 80 minutes into the debate, he checked his watch. I think he was like leaning on the podium a little bit. Joe Biden, I think looks pretty old, but nevertheless, is still pretty sharp throughout.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious about. Oh, sorry. No, go ahead, Will. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say I just had a completely different experience watching Joe Biden in this debate. I thought this was a really good performance from Joe Biden. It may be that I have lower expectations. I've had a very low opinion of Biden throughout the primaries and the general election in terms of he's just being shaky. And frankly, looking to me, not to other people, but looking to me like he is in cognitive decline. And so his performance last night was pretty darn good, I thought. He was coherent. He hit so many of his talking points. I mean, he would just pause and say, look, let me explain what this is about. I mean, I'm going to be the president of all Americans. The president's attacking me on this or that thing, but here's the point. And he had sort of wisdom, but he also sort of seemed with it. So against my low expectations, I thought he did really well.
Do you want to take a question? Again, we encourage everyone to send in questions if you have them. Well, let's just take this one, even though it's. Wait, which one do you want, Will?
No, I was just saying after we were talking about seniors, and we have a question about Florida.
Yeah, okay, let's do that one. The question is straightforward, and we love straightforward questions. Do you think Trump will win Florida? Will?
No, but I think it's going to be really, really close. And I mean, counting on him not to win Florida because I really don't want to be up for the next 2 or 3 nights after the election waiting for Wisconsin and other states to come in. So, Florida counts as ballots early. If we can put that one to bed, it's over. I mean, Biden is leading in the polls, but there's there are these tiers of states. The blue wall states, Michigan for sure, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania to some extent. Those states, Biden has a pretty comfortable lead. North Carolina and Florida are closer, so it's possible that he could lose those, even if he wins the blue wall states, Biden. But if he can put away Florida on election night, it's pretty much over. I mean, mathematically, it's extremely unlikely that Trump can put together any other coalition of states to win it.
So is your guess more about setting expectations for yourself not to be disappointed, or do you think dispassionately, looking cold hard at the numbers, that Trump has a better shot?
Well, the numbers say right now that Biden will win North Carolina and Florida, but it's close enough that if the polls are off a little bit, or if in the last days some Republicans come home to the Republican nominee, or if some people vote for the incumbent, which I just can't see. I mean, at this point, if you're not for the incumbent, I think you're either staying home, you're voting for the party, or you're voting for the challenger. But it is possible mathematically. So anyway, my answer is I think Biden runs the table. I think he takes Florida, North Carolina, Arizona, blue wall states, the
whole thing. Lili, who's going to win Florida?
I think Trump is going to win Florida. But the reason I was asking you about the older voters is because I actually think Biden scans as old in a way that Trump, because of the dye and tanner, doesn't always. And I think there is something, I don't know how this would strike seniors watching, but I am very curious about it, because I think towards the end, when Trump was kind of amping up the aggression again, I think that those dominance exercises are generally what Trump supporters like about him. But I also think it's a very ugly thing to see against Biden's fragility and occasional stutter. I think that there is a way in which I think older voters might not like that. I think it might be, it's unpleasant for me to watch, but I don't like dominance exercises. I don't find them persuasive in terms of how I'm going to vote, but I think a lot of people do. I'm curious about how seniors in particular felt about that second part of the debate, that last part, if they lost, because I think that might have a mild influence on how they would, decide ultimately. But I think he's likely to take Florida personally.
Yeah, I think seniors, a lot of the stuff that the Trump campaign has been doing, calling Biden in decline or senile or with dementia or low energy, I think that's offensive to seniors, and I don't think that's helped. I mean, we saw last week, it was last week or the week before, but Trump retweeted some meme of Biden in a nursing home.
Yeah.
I mean, it's embarrassing. And, and then some stuff Trump said at a rally a couple weeks ago, or maybe it was a month ago. Who knows? Time isn't really a construct I follow anymore. But, that the virus isn't that bad. It's only taking out older people, which is, I think some of this comes back to Trump's, there's so many different ways to psychologically analyze him, but I think he's very afraid of aging. I don't think he likes aging and what it does to aging, and he thinks it's kind of a disgusting thing. And so he thinks it's really embarrassing for Biden that he's showing some visible signs of aging, and he's using this as a way to kind of mock him as weak in a way that Trump himself is very afraid of. Mm-hmm. So I think that's maybe why, even though it's obviously in his self-interest not to go after old people or make fun of Biden for being old, he can't resist it somehow.
And in addition to all the thematic things that we're talking about that put off seniors and could hurt Trump in Florida, the one that really stands out, the thing that really stands out to me is just a very practical thing, which is Donald Trump's COVID strategy at this point is to let the old people, to keep the old people at home, away from all the people they love who are younger, and let everybody else out and circulate. I mean, they're the high-risk population. He's abandoning them. That's just a fact. That's what the strategy is. And they're not stupid, and they vote. So right. I think he's losing them for the simplest of reasons, which is that he's just told them to go to hell.
Yeah. I mean, just one last thing on Florida. Florida is a very interesting state because you see, I think it's the national average for 65 plus voters it's 22% of the electorate or so. In Florida, it's 30%. So if you look at how much better he's doing with seniors, it should, help put away Florida for Biden. But then to counter that, you're seeing Cuban Americans, Venezuelan Americans. Trump is doing quite well with them. He's not doing as badly as he was last time with Puerto Ricans. So those two things are kind of pulling at each other. It always seems like, I remember I think 2016, just all the talk about the number of Puerto Ricans who are coming into Florida was supposed to, put it out of reach for Trump. But then you also, when he was still doing well with seniors, you had so many more retirees still just coming in at a regular rate. So Florida's always stuck in this constant, within 1 point either way. I think if you look at the last few elections, someone tallied up all the votes, and it's like, over 3 or 4 elections, Republicans have 25,000 more votes in the presidential election, spread across there. So, yeah, I mean, it's always going to be within a couple of points, and I think it will this time. Will mentioned if the polls are off by a few points, it would certainly go to Trump. But there's also the possibility that I think we're all cautious about expressing just because of how 2016 went. They could also be off and underestimating Biden by a couple points, in which case it's, we might get the nice short election night that we were all hoping for instead of, watching legal disputes of every provisional ballot in Pennsylvania for a month. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know. Oh, yeah. What do you want to toss out another one? Someone? Should we talk about oil?
Oh, sure.
All right. Sorry, I just answered my own question after asking someone else to throw one out. But I guess Biden, the thing that he's been hit most on by his opponents, and he's actually gotten some pushback from Democrats in swingy districts, is he was asked if he wanted to put the oil industry out of business. And his verbatim response, which I will quote, is, "Yes, I would transition." And so the Trump campaign is going around being like, oh shit, he just lost Pennsylvania. He just lost Texas. It's over now. And I expect them to kind of exaggerate a little bit like that. I mean, what did you guys think of that response? Did you think it was particularly damaging, or was it kind of a banal statement that's being blown up a little much?
I would say that that's an example of Biden's bad habit. Biden talks like a real person. Mostly that's helpful, but one of the things you're not supposed to do in politics is begin your answer with a yes or a no. You're supposed to frame it the way you want to frame it. So the yes part of, I will transition away, right? If you would just start saying, we need to transition away, people would be what the bottom line is. And what he really wants to convey is the transition part of it, right? I'm not going to come take your job right now. I'm going to give you something else that you can move into that has a future, unlike what you're in right now. But when he says yes, that screws him. And the same thing about fracking, right? He's asked about fracking. It's a big deal in Pennsylvania. He says, you won't find me having said I'm against fracking. And then they pull out, the Trump campaign pulls out the video of Biden saying he's against fracking. What Biden said, he tried to explain his position on fracking, which was somewhat complicated, but he began with a no, if I recall the video correctly. And as soon as he said no, like there was no future for fracking, that clip right there is what gets used against him. So it's a little late to say this in terms of his campaign, but as president, if he gets to be president, Biden needs to learn to give the answer first and then let other people infer the yes or the no.
I don't know how much that's going to hurt him. I'm interested to find out like what effect that has, because I think that there are a lot of there is lingering conventional wisdom about what is and isn't like a poison pill in American politics. And so many of those poison pills have kind of shifted in valence, I think specifically because of Trump. And in a way, I think it's important that a presidential candidate is actually saying realistically, climate change, if climate change is real, then yes, right, we have to actually have painful conversations about what the future of that will be. It may be politically disastrous, and I'll be interested to see if it is. But I think my sense is that Texas knows. I mean, the oil industry knows. Like, this isn't a surprise necessarily to anyone who works in those industries. There's a lot of wind energy in Texas, and the transition to a lot of green technology is already well underway, even in regions that have historically been oil country. So I think it could be very bad. It might not be. And I think there may have been some value in the direct yes and no.
Well, I'm realizing we have a real life Texan from oil country in this very chat, Will Saletan. Oh. Were you viscerally offended when Biden said that?
No, because I'm a liberal milk toast. I come. My dad worked for Shell, so I worked in the oil industry, worked in the chemical part of the oil industry. But it's entirely different if you think there is no alternative from if you think there is. If someone comes to you and says, "You're making your living off of oil right now. That's going to run out, or it's going to be more and more difficult for you to make a living doing that. We're running up against carbon limits. We need to figure out something better. Here's another career you can have. We can train you for it. We can help you get into it, and there will be a future in it for as long as you're around." That's honest. It's appealing. It can be difficult. Some people will vote no, but some people say, "I want to stay I want to stay with coal or tobacco or whatever the industry of the hour is." But enough people, I think, would go with you if you can do that. So I didn't believe Biden was going to win Texas anyway. So Texas, and I didn't think Biden was going to win Ohio. Pennsylvania, I still think Biden will win, but that's a very specific thing, not so much about oil in general as about fracking. And as long as he's cool with fracking people, he can get by there. That's my impression.
I think it helps too, right? That Trump's presentation of the Green New Deal, or actually of any of Biden's, which that's not Biden's plan, but any of Biden's climate change plans is so bizarre that it's actually the tiny windows thing makes no sense to anybody, right? He's saying, Biden wants to tear down buildings and build new ones with teeny tiny windows. The wind
that's my number one priority is tiny windows.
What?
I want tiny windows. I see, Will, your window looks a little too big. I think we're going to have to make that smaller.
Yeah.
I have no idea what the hell he's talking about.
I don't either. And I think that actually makes the traditionally more safe position seem absurd. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But I think that Trump's opposition is so inelegant and so patently untrue that I think it actually makes climate change realists seem like the better approach. But obviously I have my biases, so I don't know if that's how other people are receiving it.
Did you make any sense of the thing about windmills and fumes? Trump said something about how the fumes from making the windmills were producing more carbon than fossil fuel. I was nutty as fuck. I didn't know what to make of it.
Well, I think there's some truth to the fact that actually, the fabrication process is polluting. I think that's what he's trying to say. I don't think it's true that when
there's
you do all the math,
some
it works
reference
out.
point that he's getting to, but I don't know what. Yeah, when he talks about the smell of, I mean, maybe he's just talking about the environmental cost of having to build them in the first place is a problem, or I don't know.
Yeah,
I mean, he doesn't like windmills because he doesn't like the views,
right.
So,
Yeah.
And he loves the birds.
We
and he
haven't
does
yet.
love birds. Big bird guy, Donald Trump.
Should we take
That's why he
another
wants the
question?
teeny tiny windows, that they're smaller and the birds are less likely to fly into them. The windmills
Yeah.
and the big window.
Lily, do you want to read another question?
Yeah, I see a question. So, do you think we're seeing a realignment or activation of new groups of voters, young, disengaged, or is this election just about these two candidates? What do you guys think?
Are we seeing a realignment? Yes, we are definitely seeing a realignment. We're seeing white college educated voters, suburban voters who are the anchor of the Republican coalition as recently as 2012, becoming pretty broadly Democratic. I think it's also interesting, just as you're seeing, white voters moving a little bit more towards Biden relative to Clinton, you're also seeing black voters, black men specifically, and Hispanic voters, not by the same margins as suburban voters are switching, but Trump's going to do a little bit better within this time. So I do think it's actually pretty interesting that for years and years and years after the racial gap between the two parties growing, it's actually going to contract a little bit this time. As far as an activation of new groups of voters, young and disengaged voters, I don't know. It's hard to tell. I think there's going to be record turnout this year. Some are saying it could be 65% of registered voters, which I think would be the highest since the early 1900s. So I think you'll see a lot of young and disengaged voters come out. I don't know if they're particularly excited to come out for Biden or if they're just coming out to vote for Trump. So I wouldn't be surprised if Trump's gone and then we kind of get back to more normal candidates or presidential elections. I don't know if this same level of activation is going to exist permanently. And I also don't necessarily know if that's a bad thing. I mean, it's always good for everyone to be activated, but I don't think everyone has to, everyone's on such high alert right now. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Well, the realignment question is the big question. The realignment one is Trump. I think Trump's going to lose, and is going to lose, I would guess, by the biggest margin of any incumbent since 1932. I think he'll lose worse than Carter lost to Reagan. And the larger question out of that is, to what extent will people who voted for Biden, who previously hadn't voted for a Democrat or who were leaned Republican on some things or conservative, to what extent will they decide, Trump is the Republican Party? I mean, there was a whole strategy that Republicans had before Trump, George W. Bush, the autopsy from 2012, which was, we need a plan for the future. We need a party that appeals to non-whites. We need a party that appeals to women. And here's what we can do. And Trump took them in the opposite direction. Now, there are some Republicans who think they can just turn around after this and nominate a different person, go with, Nikki Haley or Marco Rubio, whoever it is, and go back to the Bush strategy and become a more normal conservative party. But Trump may do lasting damage. There may be a realignment where women just consistently now vote Democratic, at least at the national level, and that non-white people of color also just decide this is not a party for me. That's a real risk to Republicans.
I've been trying to think whether there's a good answer for that about the Latino vote, and I keep coming back to my own private sense that the Latino vote is not actually, it's not a real demographic, that it's so varied that it's hard to, so anyway, that's what I was thinking about, and I have not landed on anything productive I can say about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, there are definitely segments of the Hispanic population that are moving different directions. Cuban Americans, Venezuelan Americans, ones who are a little bit more closely tied to, left-wing dictatorships in South or Central America. But then, newer Mexican American immigrants in California and Arizona are obviously going to be more democratic. In Texas, there's obviously a pretty established Republican conservative Hispanic populations that's several generations in. So yeah, I mean, it is never quite, it's not accurate to say it's a monolith or whatever, but you can, if you look at the one big number, it was 2012, Obama 71-27 among Hispanic voters. Trump, it was, I think maybe it's 2-1 or so. It could be more like Trump could get 35 to 40% of them this time. So just that one big metric is changing, but obviously it's not. There are different parts moving underneath.
Yeah.
So I think we need to start wrapping up. But is there anything you guys wanted to hit quickly, or should we just call it a day and celebrate never having to watch a debate ever again?
The one thing I want to hit quickly is that Trump's response to the 545 children who were separated from their families by the administration was appalling. And that was a true low point, and maybe one of the worst things to have happened in either debate. And that just needs to be said. But that's all.
All right. Well, thank you both for doing this again. Sorry we don't get to do any more, but not sorry there won't be any more debates. So enjoy your weekends. And one last thing for everyone who's watching, if you come back here at Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, my colleague Noreen Malone will be talking to Valerie Jarrett, alum of the Obama White House. So please come and check that out. And thank you all for tuning in.